Can you imagine if I used the F-bomb? You know what it would be? I tell people, it would be the electric chair.
There's the childish nicknames.
Very people who perpetrated the lies that I was an agent of Russia, like Adam Shifty Schiff and others.
The crazy conspiracy theories.
If you look for a job and you give up looking for that job because after 4 or 5 months you can't find one, you are considered statistically employed. We have
this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
This is the Rebel Alliance. It was Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, who first began investigating Matt Gaetz for sexual misconduct in March of 2020. It wasn't just paying for sex that Gaetz was being investigated for, but using campaign money to pay for sex, breaking sex trafficking laws, and for one of the women Gaetz allegedly paid for sex only being 17 at the time. That's to say nothing of the allegations of illicit drugs fueling the sex parties that Gaetz is said to have attended. There have to this day been no official charges based on these accusations, but the investigation by Trump's Department of Justice led to further investigations by the House Ethics Committee, and those investigations were ongoing until Matt resigned from the House of Representatives 2 weeks ago. On November 18th, an affidavit was released stating that one of the women Mr. Gaetz had paid had watched him have sex with an underage girl on a pool table. Gaetz continues to insist that he did nothing wrong, but evidence continues to come out to suggest the opposite. The Venmo transactions have now been released, where Mr. Gaetz paid at least $10,000 to at least 2 women. One would think that a nominee for Attorney General of the United States would know better than to pay for sex using Venmo. And Trump knew about all of this. Trump knew about these crimes and investigations that occurred during his first presidency when he nominated Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. It wasn't a deal breaker. And why should it be, after Trump himself was found liable for sexual assault in court? Remember E. Jean Carroll? Remember when Trump said he had been exonerated? Well, surprise, that's not exactly what happened. While the jury found him not guilty of rape, they found him liable for sexual abuse and defamation. And then there's all the times that Trump has bragged about committing sexual assault. So it's really no surprise that one sexual predator would be fine with having another sexual predator as his attorney general. Perhaps even more appalling is nominating the weekend host of Fox and Friends as Secretary of Defense. And Pete Hegseth, who is absolutely ready to turn the military against American citizens, is also under investigation for sexual misconduct. Let's come back to that in a moment, though. The most important thing to Trump when selecting his cabinet this time around is surrounding himself with people who are going to be absolutely loyal. Not to the United States, but to Trump. Trump wants people with him this time that are not going to question any decisions, not going to try to stop him from carrying out the most outrageous of his plans. Pete Hegseth fits that role perfectly, even though his highest qualification for the actual job is that he served in the National Guard and was removed from the mission of protecting the 2021 inauguration after his tattoos were determined to represent extremist views. And if that's not enough to have you wanting him to run the Pentagon, as I mentioned earlier, he also has had at least one credible accusation of sexual assault. A staffer alleged in October 2017 that Hegseth raped her in a hotel in Monterey, California. Given that parts of her memory were missing, she suspected that he had slipped some kind of drug into her drink. Hegseth paid his accuser an undisclosed amount of money, and the case went away. As of this recording, Pete Hegseth is still on track to be the next United States Secretary of Defense. Back to Matt Gaetz. When details about his sex crimes and Venmo payments to his victims became public, Gaetz pulled out from Attorney General consideration. No word on if he did from the 17-year-old girl. Hours after the withdrawal of Matt Gaetz, Trump announced his new nominee for Attorney General would be Pam Bondi. If anyone in the country is less qualified to be Attorney General than Matt Gaetz, it's Pam Legally Blonde Bondi. For years, Bondi has echoed whatever crazy ideas and conspiracy theories Trump has thrown out, and she has also lobbied to overturn the Affordable Care Act, and is quoted as saying in 2014 that other states' recognition of same-sex marriages would, quote, impose significant public harm, unquote, to Floridians. Having her in charge of the Department of Justice is unacceptable. In other news, while virtually all of the news media wasn't paying attention, a federal judge appointed by Trump ensured that millions of American workers would not have access to overtime pay. A bill sponsored by the Biden administration would ensure overtime pay for workers being paid salary but making less than $58,000 per year. The judge, Sean Jordan, ruled on the matter as the result of a lawsuit filed by Trump-aligned Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Is it a surprise to anyone that Paxton would have just given in to the desires of large corporations like McDonald's and Walmart? Paxton's argument was that the president didn't have the authority to raise the overtime threshold for salaried employees, despite decades of precedents of the president doing just that. In fact, Paxton said nothing when Trump raised the overtime threshold from $23,000 to $35,000. Congratulations, Mr. Paxton. Your blind loyalty to one man rather than the betterment of the country is obvious to anyone who's paying attention. I believe there's a word for that. Starts with C, rhymes with volt. And congratulations, Trumpers. Your constant journey to impoverish the middle class is progressing as ever. I mentioned briefly that almost every news outlet missed the story about overtime pay for employees not being paid hourly. I want to delve a little deeper now into the news outlets, and one in particular, MSNBC. All of the news networks, even the ones that are supposed to lean to the left, have normalized Donald Trump since 2015. They have completely failed to cover his most insane moments, or sterilized them when they did cover them. This is extremely dangerous. A lot of people get all or most of their news from television, so when no one is pointing out that the Republican nominee for president belongs in an asylum, or in prison, a lot of people are unaware of it. Or even worse, a network will cover a story and then try to match it with something from the other side. Sure, Trump stole classified documents and hid them in his bathroom, but Biden returned classified documents when he realized they had accidentally been held at one of his think tanks. Same thing. And none of this compares to the corruption of a man who seems to have never had an original idea in his life. Joe Scarborough has been hosting Morning Joe on MSNBC since 2007, and in that time, his opinions have been based only on what he thought at that moment would bring him the most ratings and the most money. Up until August of 2016, Scarborough was a vocal supporter of Trump and tried to push Trump on his MSNBC audience. Then, he suddenly called on the Republican Party to dump Trump with little explanation for his sudden shift in belief. After flip-flopping on the way he covered Trump during Trump's first presidential term, Scarborough became a vocal supporter of Biden during the 2020 election cycle. Last week, Joe Scarborough surprised his audience by broadcasting his show from Mar-a-Lago and featuring Donald Trump. Immediately, ratings dropped drastically for every program on MSNBC. MSNBC President Rashida Jones now must fire Joe Scarborough, or she will be equally guilty of Joe Scarborough's terrible decisions. Joe Scarborough must never again be allowed to work in television, except perhaps at Newsmax or OAN, both of which make Fox News look sane. Joe Scarborough has no opinions, no thoughts, and no information to offer. He has only what he thinks is a good read on public opinion. And, as always, he is wrong. Still to come on Rebel Alliance, we'll take a look at this week in history. First, let's go looking for this week's most moronic morons. In third place, me. Last week I reported that 2 million people had died from COVID as a result of Trump policies. According to Statista, that number is actually 1.2 million. I was jotting down notes quickly and misread the number. I stand behind the rest of the statement. In second place, Jelly Roll. Jelly Roll was shunned by MAGA on Twitter after he made a comment about equality. He pointed out how toxic their behavior was and announced that he was out before disappearing completely from Twitter. Well, as of last week, Jelly Roll is back on Twitter, and his first post after returning is of him, Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy at Trump's election night party. But in first place, Congresswoman Bonehead Nancy Mace. Nancy posted on Twitter, quote, "I don't care, I'm doubling down, and won't be quiet because some man tells me to," unquote. This is in relation to her trying to prevent Representative-elect Sarah McBride, the first transgender person to serve in the United States House of Representatives, from using the women's restroom at the Capitol. For God's sake, Nancy, let the woman pee. And now, a look at this week in history. On November 24th, 1963, Jack Ruby shot and killed the alleged assassin of John F. Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, at a Dallas police station. Oswald was being moved to a more secure facility, and television cameras were there to witness the departure. Ruby emerged from the crowd of cameras and shot Oswald once with a .38 revolver. Ruby was immediately detained and charged with first-degree murder. On November 24th, 1991, Queen frontman Freddie Mercury died from bronchial pneumonia caused by AIDS. He was officially diagnosed with AIDS in 1987, but is believed to have begun seeking treatment as early as 1982. 33 years after his death, his musical genius continues to inspire new musicians. On November 25th, 2000, The United Nations General Assembly recognized the first International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The date picked for the observance marked the anniversary of the deaths of Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal, three sisters who were murdered in 1960. Latin America had honored the day since 1981, but all UN countries would not formally recognize it for almost 2 decades. On November 28, 1925, the Grand Ole Opry started broadcasting on WSM radio in Nashville. Airing every Saturday night, the 4.5-hour program became one of the most popular broadcasts in the South and helped bring country music into mainstream popular culture. The Grand Ole Opry still airs today and has only missed 2 Saturdays in the last 99 years. On November 30th, 1609, Galileo began observing the moon with a telescope he had constructed himself. He became the first person to publish a report regarding his findings about the moon. He found the moon to be full of mountains and valleys, rather than being smooth as was previously thought. On November 30th, 2004, Ken Jennings' 74-game winning streak on Jeopardy came to an end when he lost his 75th game. The final Jeopardy clue in that game was most of this firm's 70,000 seasonal white-collar employees work only 4 months a year. Nancy Zerg took the lead when she revealed her correct question, "What is H&R Block?" Jennings was still close enough to steal the game back until he revealed his incorrect question, "What is FedEx?" Jennings set a record on Jeopardy by winning more than $2.5 million in his initial run, and now hosts the show following the death of Alex Trebek. Nancy Zerg lost the next day. And that's this week in history on Rebel Alliance. Now, as a special Thanksgiving week treat, I'll share the history of one of Washington, D.C.'s weirdest traditions, the presidential turkey pardon. This tradition can be traced back to 1863, when President Lincoln reportedly allowed a turkey chosen for Christmas dinner to live after his son Tad had become attached to it. In 1947, President Truman became the first president to receive a turkey from the National Turkey Federation. It's reported that he pardoned that turkey and started the tradition, but this is disputed by the Truman Library and Museum. True or not, the tradition was sporadic at best for many years. Kennedy, Nixon, and Carter are all known to have let turkeys live on Thanksgiving Day, but none of them used the word pardon. Ronald Reagan was the first president to officially grant a turkey a presidential pardon. In 1989, George H.W. Bush made it an official tradition to grant a turkey a presidential pardon on Thanksgiving Day. Since then, a turkey's life has been spared at the White House every year on Thanksgiving. Since Trump is so obsessed with numbers, how about in 8 weeks' time, we show him the biggest crowd to ever peacefully protest a presidential inauguration? Remember to do your part by not patronizing businesses that support MAGA. Let's bankrupt them. Thank you, Rebels, for being part of the Alliance. And thank you for listening. Please subscribe to Rebel Alliance on Spotify and YouTube. If you know someone who should be listening to Rebel Alliance, please send it to them and ask them to subscribe as well. So that's Rebel Alliance for this week. 8 weeks until the inauguration of lame duck president, convicted felon Donald Trump, and 216 weeks until the scheduled end of his presidency. Do what you can to resist, and in the meantime, keep breathing, drink water, take your vitamins and meds, and sleep when you can. Until next time, never back down.
If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.